Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Vision podcast, where we break down the best health tech stories of the week so you don't have to. I'm Hugh from SomX, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ben Shemesh from the Health Foundation, who's going to come and talk to us about some of the latest research that the Foundation's published. Ben, how's your week been? What have you been working on?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Week's been great. We just published a piece on tech to save time, so really excited about that and looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. So tell us a bit about yourself. What's your, what's your focus at the Health Foundation? What are you working on day to day? What comes next after this research?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a senior improvement analyst at the Health Foundation in the Insights and Analysis unit. And my work primarily focuses on tech, AI, and productivity and how the NHS can sort of use technology to improve care quality, to free up time for staff. And yeah, we've been looking at tech in terms of time savings, and we've got a few publications that have come out on that, including our most recent one, which we're going to discuss today.
Fantastic, and a great moment to segue on to the first story then. So our first story comes to us from the Health Foundation, and that is Tech to Save Time, how the NHS can realise the benefits. We spend a lot of time on Pigeon Podcast, and I think in wider digital health conversation, trying to consider the benefits of digital health. And one of the top ones is most often pointed to is probably how much time does digital save versus standard approaches versus traditional approaches. And it's a reasonable question, isn't it? It's something that we do need to consider, particularly as clinician time becomes, more pressured, more important, and burnout and other challenges become a ever more pressing issue for the NHS and for healthcare more widely. But it's, I would say we talked last week about NICE moving its standards for assessment from cost effectiveness to cost saving. And I wonder whether time effectiveness and time saving may be something we can talk about today. So, Ben, if you could give us a rundown then of the research and the top findings.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Before I go into the findings, I think maybe talk a little bit about the context. And as you mentioned, we've been talking about tech and how it can free up time and as well as improve care quality for many years. It's been part of numerous sort of reports, long-term plans, budgets, the DASI report most recently, and now the government's planned shift from analog to digital. And so over the last year, we spent a lot of time at the Health Foundation exploring this topic, and we've published now a third publication in this area. So the first publication, we looked at which technologies offer the biggest time-saving opportunities. We then asked clinicians how they would actually use time freed up by technology, because one of the key assumptions around tech and time is that clinicians would use freed up time directly back into patient care. And now our third publication investigates some of the challenges of using technology to free up time and explores why technology some of the reasons why technology can have a negative impact on staff time as well.
Fantastic. And jumping back to those kind of earlier publications, I think we explored them at the time, but it was, you mentioned that assumption that time freed up would go back into patient care, and I think that wasn't necessarily the full story, was it? There were other things that quite reasonably time would go into, that time would be used in different ways for, and that it wasn't necessarily all going back into seeing more patients, nor should it be.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, from our survey with clinical staff, only 27% said that time would go directly back into patient care. Many staff said that they would put this time back to sort of reducing their amount of overtime, towards doing some admin work. And even as you can imagine, some of them just wanted to have a break and, get some fresh air. So I think it's really important that we challenge the assumption that freed up time automatically translates to direct patient care. There's a lot of different factors that go into that.
It's rational as well to think that that for each there's a kind of mix, isn't it? There's the kind of top three things you might do with the time as well. It's like I think many would say that some of that time that they got back would go into this, some of the time would go into that. But there is a benefit to patient care by saving clinicians time, but there's also a benefit to the work-life balance, addressing burnout, getting admin done, which is clearly a challenge. And I think pretty much every task out there. So, it is a real mix in terms of where that time goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. I think, one part about it is saving time, and another part of it is sort of staff health and well-being, and reducing burnout and reducing stress. And the more we can do that, we know that that can have an impact on care quality in the future.
Great. So let's talk about this week's research. I mean, we talk about giving time back, but apparently that's not always the case with digital health and technology. So what are the kind of big outputs from this? What are we seeing? What is giving people time back? What maybe isn't, and is that always a bad thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for some context on this piece, it was analysis published off the back of a rapid evidence review that looked into the impact of tech on staff time. We sampled close to 500 studies from 2010 to 2023 that looked at whether a particular technology saved staff time or not. And in this part of the analysis, we looked specifically at those that had a negative or no impact on staff time. In terms of findings, I think the most interesting finding was in all but one of the categories of technologies that we had, the findings showed a mixed impact on staff time. That is, technologies could either have a positive impact or also a negative impact on staff time. And this is a really critical point, and it highlights to us that whether or not a technology will generate time savings very much depends on how it's implemented and how it's used in practice. And what I mean by that is how it's embedded into workflows and processes, and how those things are redesigned to really take advantage of the new functionalities a particular tech offers. I think this is probably self-evident, but interesting to see in front of you. We have, I guess, a really strong announcement culture in the NHS, where we sort of associate action with the initiation of something rather than the achievement of it. And when we say that, we're going to purchase or procure this new piece of technology, that alone is not going to give us the benefits from that technology. It's how we use it, how we implement it in practice.
So it feels like it's a workflow design question almost as much as it is a do technology save us time? Is that right? What can we take away from this?
I think takeaway is that implementation is everything, and if we can get implementation right, we'll hopefully see the benefits that technology has to offer. If we just purchase the technology and hope that it's going to, make massive improvements, we're probably not going to see real impact.
So I think one of the kind of key examples that's in there, I mean, the kind of core comparison in the intro at least is the clinical decision-making tool versus robotic surgery, where I think it was in 80% of, and correct me if I'm getting these numbers completely wrong, in 85% of studies of a clinical decision tool, there was a time-saving element there. But in only 52% robotic surgery implementations as a time saving. It feels like that's almost to be expected, that maybe, okay, so robotic surgery doesn't save people's time, but you might see a higher quality result. You might see a more standardized approach. There might be patient safety challenges and standardization across the board that would come out of that would still see a benefit. Are we too quick to say technology has to save time, or that's one of the expectations? Is I guess, do we need technology to save time in order to be worth implementing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that really depends on the goal of technology. What are the outcomes that you want to see? Just because a technology has a negative impact on staff time doesn't mean that it is unsuccessful, like you said. So, for example, a piece of tech might have a negative impact on staff time, but still improve clinical outcome or promote patient safety or enhance staff experience. And with something like robotic assisted surgery, we know, for example, that it takes time to train doctors to use the robot. There are things like maintenance costs. There are things about how the robot is embedded into surgical workflows. And so there's initially you might see a negative impact on staff time to sort of get this robotic assisted surgery device to be implemented well. But over time, what we might see is improved surgical precision and quality, which could lead to shortened recovery time, to shortened length of stay, and hopefully lower rates of readmissions to hospitals in the future. And so down the line, we might experience those time savings, but initially we might not. And so it really depends, like I said at the beginning, on the goal of these technologies and how we're actually judging them in the first place. Time isn't the only outcome, it's one of them. But we could also focus on quality, on safety, on experience.
It's a really stark. There's a really stark case study in the research that I found very interesting. The sort of use of remote monitoring of I think it was a urinary health solution, where the nurse, the nurses or the I can't recall. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the clinician responsible for monitoring results and checking in on the results, the instances where these cases were being monitored remotely weren't replacing the duties of the clinician on duty at the time. So that even though this was allowing these cases to be monitored remotely, they were still doing as many in person as they would have done before. And this was a new task for them alongside their kind of day-to-day work. And this feels not necessarily like how is this saving time, but how are we looking at workflows, how are we adjusting how time is used and expecting more from clinicians when technology is implemented. What are the learnings that teams, that providers can put in place then from systems like this? Is it just you need to look at other things when starting an implementation, when choosing a technology, or does it go broader than that? Is it about objective setting, problem identification, understanding whether these will actually solve your problem and not just kind of closing the gap and not just adding something else to a workflow?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a combination of a lot of those things. I think everyone's sort of aware of the productivity paradox in relation to tech, and sometimes we throw tech at challenges that don't need tech, and ultimately that means that we need other pieces of technology to help make them work. And I guess it begs the question: are we actually improving productivity? Are we actually more efficient, or are we actually worse off than we were in the future? So I think one thing is around making sure that things are challenge focused, that we're actually identifying the challenge and picking the right solution to address that challenge. Technology might be one solution, it might not be. I think a second thing that you picked up on is, I guess, one of the key reasons why the use of technology can have a negative impact on staff time. And that's really down to how it's embedded into workflows and processes. In the example that you gave, that is from our piece, the reason why that technology failed to positively impact staff time was because it essentially duplicated the activities that they had to do. And what we found is that in terms of the reasons why technology can have a negative impact on staff time, the top two reasons were that staff spend more time doing usual tasks or have to do extra tasks when using a particular piece of technology. So, absolutely. Number one, ensuring that it actually meets a particular challenge, And then number two, making sure that that technology is embedded into workflows and processes, that teams understand which tasks are compulsory, which tasks are not, and really sort of even going one step further, having staff being involved in the design of those technologies in the first place is critical.
Yeah, I can see. Without it's just adding something without looking at what already exists and the existing workflow and how you adapt. From a final point, I just wanted to pick up on the kind of three key lessons that you included in the research at the end, and particularly that last one. Greater emphasis is needed on optimizing the use of existing technologies to deliver their maximum value. I'd love to get a sense of, when you say existing technologies, are we talking things that are being piloted, or are we talking much older solutions where to what extent are we talking about legacy? To what extent are we talking about not just looking at the next shiny thing when it comes to technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the third recommendation that we make in the piece is around optimizing the use of existing technologies and not placing a strong emphasis on cutting edge tech solutions. One clear example of that is electronic health records. A recent Health Foundation survey with clinical staff named electronic health records as one of the technologies most likely to deliver time savings over the next 5 years. But at the same time, clinical staff have also expressed frustration that they're not being used effectively or to their full potential. We know in the system that a little bit more than 90% of NHS trusts have electronic health records, but we also know that they're definitely not being used to their full potential. They don't talk to each other. There's poor interoperability, standardization, and so really thinking about how we can leverage this technology that's already in the system, one of those being electronic health records, is going to give us huge benefits rather than focusing on cutting edge tech solutions that still need time to be piloted, to be trialed, to be tested.
It strikes me that EHRs are, one of probably the most criticized tech for not being right. And you've touched on a whole heap of points there, and the interoperability, not talking to one another. They're still having to cut and copy and paste information from one system to another to get it into a record. It's not just a difficulty thing; it's a patient safety thing as much as anything else. It really does stretch a lot. Is, for example, addressing that interoperability point often more of a kind of system and human problem necessarily than a technological problem, going to be more impactful than things like ambient scribes coming through, where it's kind of changing how clinicians interact with those systems?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think when you think about it on a really basic level, I mean, from our survey with clinical staff, one of the things that they said was a barrier for them to using this tech effectively was even things like having multiple logins and passwords for different systems. So if you really sort of strip it back on sort of a day-to-day use case level, having one system per service as opposed to multiple systems, even multiple systems across an individual ward. So small things like that we can focus on, that we can address these barriers to really enabling staff to do the great work that they do, can go a really long way in helping us realize the benefits of technologies such as electronic health records.
Is there anything else you'd want to raise out of that research? Anything you'd want to point us to?
Yeah, I think what we sort of allude to at the end of this piece is the real opportunity that we have with the upcoming 10-year health plan, and we provide sort of three recommendations for that. The first is, like we go on about at the Health Foundation, is that we need to fund the change, not just the tech. When it comes to tech, implementation is everything. Using the tech alone will not realize any benefit. But if we can implement it well, incorporate it into the way that we work, have staff and users involved in the design of the tech from the beginning, we know that it will help us realize some of the benefits that we know it can have.
Is there space for for change in the NHS at the moment? I mean, I think this is always the challenging one. Is you have clinicians who are obviously facing immense pressures, burnout, kind of something we've talked about a lot on here, and then even a well-funded implementation, is there space and capacity for that? How do we overcome that kind of resistance to change, and I guess the lack of capacity to support a high quality implementation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when it comes to capacity, I think there's work to be done in terms of translating roles. I think there's work to be done in terms of funding for the change as well, and how that can impact on capacity. So we know that a lot of funding is sort of directly related to capital expenditure on particular technology. But what we don't see is funding and support for change over the long term. And instead, what we're calling for is, like I mentioned before, sustained funding of the change, not just of tech, not just of capital, but of support structures, of training programs, of initiatives that alleviate capacity and staff to really have a key focus on implementation, not just on and spread and scale, not just on procuring new technologies in the first place.
Ideal. I think I interrupted you as you were going through the last few points as well.
The second point that second recommendation from the paper was that successful implementation requires designing new uses of technology in consultation with staff, and really avoiding a one size fits all approach. So, like we've already spoken about, one of the key ways that we can alleviate some of the barriers when it comes to realizing the benefits of technology is having staff involved in the design and implementation of that particular technology. We also know that technology is highly context specific. So one technology might work really well in one service, but might not work in another. And so we need to have a flexible approach to implementation that takes into consideration the needs and challenges of the users in each particular context. And third, finally, as we've already spoken about, was on the need to focus on optimizing existing technologies in the system as opposed to focusing on cutting edge tech.
Are there any lessons for industry on this one? I think there's some really great recommendations for the NHS, and I think important things for as we're thinking about the 10-year plan. But in terms of, I mean, it strikes me that a lot of the challenges are almost on the side of the supplier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think what needs to be what we'd like to see is for these new technologies to be sort of challenge oriented, and that for industry that means really working alongside the NHS and working alongside staff to identify issues that are coming out of the NHS and out of the front line, as opposed to solutions that are being generated by industry that are then sort of applied to the NHS. We really want to make sure that we have a challenge focus for technology that's being implemented, that's being developed moving forward.
And presumably betting on the ones that kind of show the best results, whether that's in time or other efficiencies or other improvements in care.
That's correct, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. I'm sure it's going to be really influential when it comes to actually putting together this year's plans and the next step for the digital agenda in health. But really, thank you for coming on and chatting about it. Our second story comes to us from Medscape, and that is that France bets on medical AI to train 100,000 doctors yearly. France is accelerating its adoption of artificial intelligence in healthcare, with plans to train 100,000 caregivers annually and build Europe's largest AI-focused data centre. There's quite a lot going on in this. Some of it is related to healthcare, some of it isn't, so we'll strip back some of it. But ultimately, the French government is looking at developing a national roadmap to drive innovation and ensure the ethical AI use in healthcare. I would say there's one really big standout point in this for me, which is on the digital skills agenda, and that is requiring all first year medical students to train on AI, which I think would definitely be the first example of that I can think of in medical education going on at the moment. And I believe we're probably not close to doing that yet. But Ben, I'd love to get your reaction to this and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting initiative. I think when it comes to training, we know that staff skill and training is fundamental to effective implementation. And we know that AI technologies, while they're not quite embedded within the system, that they are hopefully going to be within the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And so training the next generation of health professionals with the right skills and tools to be able to use artificial intelligence well in the system is going to be critical. So I think that's a really interesting initiative, and I look forward to seeing sort of what impact that might have for students moving forward.
So, I mean, you've been looking at a lot of the kind of technology that's in use that is, I mean, it comes back to that kind of time saving piece, and almost there is a kind of digital literacy challenge with a lot of healthcare, well, digital healthcare implementation, isn't there? And that at least part of that can be down to people not necessarily being fully confident using AI tools, AI solutions, digital health solutions generally. But I think AI is probably the kind of one that's coming up more and more. How much do we need this? I think, France is requiring all first year medical students to start looking. Should we be looking at doing the same? Should that be a requirement of our medical education syllabus?
I don't think I can comment on what the UK should and shouldn't do in terms of their syllabus. I think from the research that we've done and from my experience, what I can say is that we know that artificial intelligence is going to play a role in healthcare in the future, and in order for it to for us to sort of realize the benefits that it can offer, we need staff to have trust and confidence in it. We need them to have the skills and tools and capabilities in their locker to use it effectively, and we also need patients to have an effective understanding of how it's going to influence their care, and training individuals on how to use that is only a positive thing, I believe.
There's quite a lot of information in this. Are there any other kind of takeaways that we can look at from the AI summit in terms of what France is betting on from a healthcare AI? What are we doing that's similar? Are there things that we can look to that could prove inspiring for what we're looking at as we look at kind of digital health skills and sort of AI investment over the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. There is sort of two parts that are really interesting, covered at the bottom of the article, which is around sustainability and environmental concerns and ethics as well. When it comes to ethics and AI, we know that while safety is a really important part of AI development, adoption, and implementation, the potential of AI means that we need to focus I guess, a little bit more broadly on not just how we can avoid harmful outcomes and sort of minimize risk, but also instead focus on what we call at the Health Foundation responsible AI, which is an approach that ensures that implementation of AI is not only trustworthy, it's designed with ethics in mind, it minimizes risks, but ultimately is one that benefits all people, all of society, and the planet as well. So last year we published a piece calling for a dedicated AI and healthcare strategy in the UK, and a big focus of that piece was around responsible AI. So I guess pushing the fold, not just in terms of patient safety, in terms of minimizing risk, but also how it can benefit all people, including the planet as well. So really incorporating that sustainability aspect as well.
when we talk about responsible AI, we talk a lot about the kind of the bioethics side and the data ethics side, and kind of bridging health inequalities and making sure that we're training health AI tools in particular on, as wide a possible data set and as diverse a possible data set, and making sure that everyone is reflected within that data set as well, and that you're recognizing differences and accounting for that in system design and technology design. Talk me through the sustainability piece in a bit more detail, because it's probably less frequently discussed when we talk about responsible development of AI for healthcare, isn't it? Even though sustainability and net zero is a big part of the NHS agenda at the moment.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the impact of artificial intelligence on the environment is something that's often overlooked, and I think especially now with many governments pushing towards developing these massive data centers, the environmental impact and footprint that these centers are having is enormous, and something that definitely needs to be considered, especially as we move forward with sort of more models requiring more power, more energy. It's something that we are definitely exploring more at the Health Foundation as part of our work on net zero, and really looking into not just what the UK can do, but also exploring what some of the other leading countries in the world have done in this space. So there's a lot we can learn from countries like Norway, like Denmark and Japan, on how we can incorporate sustainability as part of this responsible AI approach.
Well, I think a lot to think about there. Interested to hear more, and particularly see whether we're still, as we keep that conversation going on about responsible AI, the role of the sustainability agenda in it. But well, thanks, Ben, for coming on and talking to us about the research and some of the other stories that are in this week's newsletter. If you want to find out more, you can read all the stories that we've discussed and more, as well as some of the best jobs, events, and podcasts in health tech at healthtechpigeon.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks, Ben, and of course, producer Adama. We'll see you next week.